Joining us now is Cliff Sloan. He was a clerk for Justice Stevens at the Supreme Court. He's now a visiting scholar at Georgetown Law School, just the next step in what has been a long career in public service, including in high-level positions at the State Department. Mr. Sloan, thanks very much for joining us tonight. I appreciate you making time on short notice.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being here.
So I know that this is just breaking news. We're all learning this just over the last few minutes. But given your experience working closely with Justice Stevens, your experience clerking for him, I just wanted to ask what you can add to our understanding of him as a jurist and as a man, as your employer for the time that you spent in his chambers.
Well, let me start as a jurist. And he is truly one of the greats, unquestionably one of the greatest Supreme Court justices we have ever had. He was the rule of law justice. You know, when he was first put on the federal bench, somebody described him as a judge's judge, and that is the perfect description because he was the rule of law justice, whether it was Guantanamo, as Linda Greenhouse was just saying, and upholding the legal rights there, whether it was in his memorable and historic dissent in Bush v. Gore, or in his decision in the Paula Jones versus Bill Clinton case, where he said, and it was controversial at the time for the court, that the litigation could proceed because the president is not above the law. He always stood for the rule of law, and he was not a predictable player. With him, one saw the Supreme Court at its best, which is the Supreme Court rising above predictable political partisanship, predictable political sides, and standing for the majesty of the law. And one could go on in different fields of law. But his influence on the law, tremendously consequential. Gay rights, abortion, free speech on the internet, just on and on and on. He had such a profound impact in his 35 years.
I know that. Sorry, go ahead,
I'm
sir.
sorry.
No,
I was just going to say, as great as he was as a justice, he was truly a very special man. He was kind and gentle. And let me just give you one example. And, you know, for his powerful legal insight and his intellect, he was the most unassuming guy. And he would love to tell the story of when he first moved to Washington, when he came on the Supreme Court. And he was doing the things that you do when you move to a new city. He was opening a bank account and that kind of thing. And he's filling out the bank application. And there's a space for occupation. And he puts down justice. And the bank official kind of shrugs and says, OK, last week I had a guy who said peace. And he just he loved that story. And that tells you a lot about him as a person.
Let me just ask you, Cliff, I know that Justice Stevens, like a lot of Supreme Court justices, after they retire from the bench, or even while they're still on the bench for older justices, sort of preside over a community of clerks, that they're clerks who'd served with them over the years. They stay in touch. I know that Justice Stevens went out of his way to host his clerks and to see people frequently right up through this year. I wonder if in that community, if he ever engaged with his former clerks and with his colleagues about his decision to maintain this public life that he did after his retirement. As Linda was saying, writing multiple books, writing a book about suggested amendments to the Constitution, writing an op-ed in the New York Times just last year in which he said that people who are looking for gun reform in this country should seek a repeal of the Second Amendment. He made very pointed comments about President Trump and his necessity in following the law in terms of complying with subpoenas. He really stayed at the forefront of a lot of very controversial public issues, even after his retirement. I wonder if you ever talked to him about those matters, if you know anything about whether he wrestled with that at all.
Well, he felt very, very strongly about these legal issues and these public issues. And any time you talk to him, he was just brimming with ideas and insights. And he actually had a get-together of all of his former clerks just this past May to celebrate his 99th birthday, which was in April, and the publication of his wonderful memoir about his entire life, including in detail his time on the court. And you know, Rachel, to your point, it was very interesting because at that gathering, there was a question and answer session. And one of the clerks said, Justice, you care so much about the rule of law, and the rule of law is under such attack and faces so many challenges these days. And what can we do? And he looked out at all of us and he said, all you can do is do your best every day and fight as hard as you can. And I want to say that while we are all touched by sadness that we have lost this great and wonderful man, we also want to celebrate his life. And the best way of honoring him is to do exactly what he said, which is to fight every day as hard as we can for the rule of law. And he understood deep to his bones that that has never been more important than it is today. And so I would like to suggest that the occasion of his death is an occasion for celebrating this man's wonderful life and his values, and it is an occasion for all of us to redouble and re-triple our efforts to fight for the rule of law, because he felt so strongly that there is nothing more important to our American system. And Rachel, in answer to your question, every day in every conversation, he thought about that very, very much and cared about it very deeply.
Cliff Sloan, who was a clerk to Justice Stevens at the Supreme Court, who's now a visiting scholar at Georgetown Law School. Cliff, thanks for making time to join us tonight, getting to the studio as we got word about Justice Stevens' passing tonight. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right. Before we got word of the passing of former Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens tonight, again, that breaking news, he has passed at the age of 99. He leaves behind him a community of former clerks and admirers and colleagues, sort of unparalleled in the judiciary in terms of the respect that people had for him, I think, across the ideological spectrum, and the integrity with which he was seen to have lived his life. Just a very sad day to lose Justice Stevens, but also, as Cliff Sloan was saying there, an opportunity to celebrate his 99 years on the earth.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.